Prime Minister Mark Carney and his Liberal Party won yesterday's federal elections in Canada. It was a stunning turnaround in a race that just a few months ago showed the Conservative Party leading in opinion polls by as much as 25%. The Liberal Party fell short of winning an outright majority in Parliament, but still counted more seats than the Conservatives. Joining us now is John Von Hiking. He's professor and chair of the Political Science Department at the University of Lethbridge in Alberta. Good to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great to join you. Thank you for having me.
What are your thoughts a day later? What are your thoughts on what happened yesterday?
Yeah, well, I mean, the polls told us to expect that the Liberals would likely win. As you pointed out, the Conservatives were ahead by as much as 25 points, but two things happened in January that changed the game. The first was January 6th when the former Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, resigned. He was highly unpopular, and it kind of, as events bore out, by him resigning and Mr. Carney replacing him as Prime Minister or leader of the Liberal Party, that certainly improved the Liberal Party's fortunes. The second event was the inauguration, January 20th, of Mr. Trump and his activities on social media and the various activities calling for Canada to be the 51st state, which were not received very well by the Canadian electorate. And they responded by and large part by moving support to the Liberals because a significant number of Canadians saw Mark Carney as the best bet to stand up to Mr. Trump.
As far as some of those comments, those social media comments, what weighed more? Tariffs, talks of annexation? What really hit with Canadian voters?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think they hit in different ways. So the 51st state comments were kind of ill received by Canadians as a wound to Canadian pride. Whereas the tariff talk scared Canadians in their pocketbooks. And especially Canadians living in central Canada around Toronto, the Great Lakes region, which is the manufacturing core of the Canadian economy, which the tariffs represented the greatest threat.
Indeed, but it's just interesting, John. I mean, the turnaround, I mean, the Conservative leader, the Conservative candidate, he lost his own seat. This is from a party double digits, as we've mentioned, ahead, and such a quick turnaround. That really is something.
Yeah, well, the Conservatives will definitely have to spend some time in the coming weeks and months investigating and reviewing their performance and how they campaigned. But I'll just kind of point out two things. The first is that the Conservatives actually vastly improved their vote count and their seat count in this election from where they were. In fact, their increases were significantly more than the Liberals. Not enough to win them the election, mind you, but they showed the greatest increases. And those increases actually came a lot in the region of suburbs around Toronto, which is the biggest metropolitan area in Canada. With regard to Mr. Poilievre losing his riding, I mean, that's humiliating. When that happens to a leader of a party, that's humiliating. But I think part of that can be attributed to the large increase in federal government employees who live in the Ottawa region. Ottawa is the capital of Canada. Pierre Poilievre, he did represent a riding in the Ottawa region, and I think there's just the shifting demographics and the large number of federal workers on the government payroll that has really increased since COVID.
So John, who is Mark Carney? Compare him to Pierre Trudeau, and the Liberals do not have a majority now in Parliament. What are his challenges getting things done?
He's got a lot of challenges. So Mark Carney, he's got quite a resume. He's the former former governor of the Bank of Canada, former governor of the Bank of England, which is kind of unusual. So he comes with an impressive resume of international finance and helping to run companies like Brookfield. But the challenges he faces are ones that Canadians have faced over the last decade, and really some of the same challenges that that the previous government had. So economic performance has been disappointing. High housing prices has left a lot of people out of the housing market. I mean, I just as a data point, the average house price in Canada is higher than it is in the United States, with an average annual income which is lower amongst Canadians. So there's some real kind of economic problems. One of the interesting data points in support for the parties is that it's the Conservatives were generally more popular amongst people under, say, 50 or 45. And part of that is that there's growing disillusionment among younger people about economic prospects and also prospects of owning a home. I just saw um, a, a study that was released last week that showed that the average age where somebody buys their first home in Canada had risen from, like, within the last 15 years, had risen from 30 years old to 40 years old.
Wow, wow.
And you can imagine sort of what kind of life, how
Yes.
that affects one's lives and life prospects.
La-
So, go
Real
ahead.
quickly, we got to wrap it up here, but real quickly, I do want to get the idea of a new prime minister here, same prime minister, but the prime minister in for good here now, and the relationship with the U.S. What's the dynamic, if you, relatively quickly, if you could?
Yeah, well, Mr. Carney and Mr. Trump spoke today, and the report on the phone call that it was cordial and they plan to meet in person at some time soon. They didn't say when that would be. I think Mr. Carney will make every effort to do two things. First, to tell the Canadian electorate that the Trump administration represents an existential threat to Canadians. And second, to try to dampen that threat, to try to make sure that relations with the United States get steadier. He'll have an opportunity in June when the G7 meets in Alberta, um, um, but they might meet beforehand, but we don't know for sure.
John Von Hiking, again, University of Lethbridge. Thank you, sir. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.